Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. It is just afternoon here on the East Coast, and I'm still drinking my second cup of coffee. It's about 12:05 or so here in Washington, or Washington, D.C. And I wanted to do my second cup of coffee today because I really want to talk about this book that I've been reading. But before I get into that, let me just start and do like I always do and acknowledge I'm speaking to you from what are Piscataway lands. The Piscataway are the nation that they were living here and hunting here, farming here, fishing here, raising their families here, and burying their dead here long before Columbus got lost at sea. And those Piscataway are still here, right? They are the indigenous hosts of these lands. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am and remind all of us how humble we need to be as we're walking on indigenous lands, no matter where we are throughout Turtle Island. So thank you, my relatives, for joining me. Thank you for taking some time today to talk about this book. I've been working on this book for several weeks now. And I want to start by talking, right? And it's a great book. I'm not slow. I'm not reading it so slowly because I don't like the book. It's not a good book. It is a very good book. The book I'm reading is called The Rebellious Life of Miss Rosa Parks by Jeanne Theoharis. And it is a very, very good book that really wrestles with Rosa Parks and not just her act of defiance on the bus of not giving her seat up, but her lifetime of activism and protest and anger and working against the white supremacy that was so prevalent throughout this entire country back even in the 1940s and 50s when she was doing so much of her work. And I was even, as I was thinking about this this second cup of coffee, and if you have a chance, grab a cup of coffee and take a seat and sit down and join me. Actually, before I get in, let me see who's on with me. Let me pull up the chat here and see who's joining me this morning. Susan Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining me this morning. It's good to have you on with me. George Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining today. Good to have you here. Thank you for your land acknowledgement and joining me here this morning. I'm grateful for everyone who's able to sit down and take a few moments to talk about things that are important and look at things hopefully through a different perspective. As I said before, I began working on this book and I wanted to read this book, The Rebellious Life of Miss Rosa Parks, during Black History Month. Because of Rosa Parks' work as an activist, a protester throughout the civil rights movement, and her work as a Black woman. As my reading went slower than I anticipated, I thought it actually would not be bad to extend this podcast episode into March, because March is Women's History Month. And the more I read this book and the more I looked at the challenges that Rosa Parks faced, I noticed a lot of the way her life was used and the way she was tokenized and minimized as a giant who she was in the civil rights movement. But her image was tokenized into a single quiet woman doing a single solitary act peacefully. Was not only because she was Black, but also that was taking place because she was a woman. And so I want to honor Rosa Parks for her work bringing equality, racial equality as a Black person. And I want to honor her work and the incredible job she's done as a woman in a nation that is so obsessed with its own patriarchy. And so I honor Rosa Parks for who she was and the work she did, and for her entire life of rebellion as a Black woman. But what I wanted to talk about today, and I'm working my way through the book, and I'm probably going to come back and bring this book up at several points throughout the next few weeks as I'm working my way through it. But I actually got caught on the introduction. The introduction was a difficult read for me, and I didn't even fully understand why. In fact, I was re-listening to the introduction today as I was trying to process what was it about the introduction that made it so difficult for me to continue to pick up this book and to read it. And the book that the version of the book that I'm looking at, and I'll show you the cover here if you want to take a look at it yourself. If you are able to buy it, I highly recommend you buy the book. There's an Audible version, there's a Kindle version, there's a hard copy, and there's a paperback version available. You can buy anywhere books are sold. But in 2000, I think in 15 or 2000, soon after 2015, it was republished and it got a new introduction. And so the version I'm listening to actually has two introductions. It has the original introduction that came out when the book was first published, and then there's a new introduction that was written, I think, back in 2015. And the two introductions are not short, right? The new introduction is actually about 45 minutes long, and the original introduction is about 45 or 35 minutes long. And so there's significant pieces of work in the introduction, and they give very much kind of a summary or an overview of what is in the book and kind of what the book is trying to do. And I'll just start right with the new introduction. And the new introduction talks about a ceremony held on February 27th of 2013. And it's the unveiling of a statue of Rosa Parks. She is the first Black person to have a statue unveiled at Statuary Hall on the U.S. Capitol. And it talks about the tributes that were given to Rosa Parks during that unveiling. It talked about how John Boehner talked about this was a great way to celebrate America. He was the Speaker of the House at the time, and Nancy Pelosi, who was the minority leader of the House, she talked about and said that Rosa Parks did what was natural. She was tired, and so she sat down. President Obama, who was president back in 2013, he praised Rosa Parks for her singular act of action that really sparked this whole movement of the bus boycott. And the whole purpose of the book is to point out that Rosa Parks lived a life of protest and rebellion and refusal to submit to the lie of white supremacy. And when we reduce her life down to a single, solitary, peaceful, casual act that she did of just, she was a tired old woman, a mother figure who refused to get up, who did not have the energy to get up when a white woman wanted to sit in her seat. That so tokenizes her life and the incredible work and effort and dedication that she put into living a life of protest and struggling when it, even historically, it was not sexy to struggle against white supremacy, right? I mean, there's in the 60s and 70s, right, when we had the civil rights movement was really moving along, that's when we like to point out the history of the speeches of Dr. King and the things that were going on, especially in the late 60s. And right, as things were moving and there was momentum, even from white people, to kind of do some of these changes. And the book points out that, yeah, those were some of the points where it was much more acceptable to look back and pat ourselves on the back for our willingness to change. But the work that Rosa was doing back in the 50s, right, this was just slogging through the minutia of white supremacy and Jim Crow and all of the things that were beholden, not only in the South, but throughout this entire country. And the attitudes that we had in policing towards Black people and towards African Americans. And that's when Rosa was doing some of her most important work. And so to frame her life as she was an old woman in 1955 who was just too tired to get up for a white person and give them her seat on the bus is incredibly insulting and demeaning to what Rosa Parks did and the effort and the cost that she paid throughout her entire life for her life of protest. And so I found, just by even listening to the new introduction, I was feeling very, very angry. Because this is what our nation does. And I want to just give you even a few quotes that came from this first introduction. I was going back to think through and what was it that really got me. And so, right, they point out the comment that John Boehner made, which this is a great way to celebrate America, right? This is America. We're the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we're about equality. And this is a tribute to America. Not acknowledging that Rosa Parks was actually fighting against America. America did not want these things. And then Nancy Pelosi, when she said she did what was natural, she was tired, so she sat down. The more you learn about Rosa Parks, the more you realize she did not just sit down because she was a tired old woman. That was not what she was doing, right? And then even President Obama, who praised her singular act, reduced that down to a single act. And one of the quotes it said was, unveiling the statue was treated as an act of racial justice in itself. The ceremony was a stand-in for more concrete action. And the author goes on to point out that the very day that the statue was being unveiled and politicians were patting themselves on the back for giving a Black person a space in Statuary Hall, SCOTUS was hearing a case that would eventually lead to them diminishing and even overturning huge parts of the Voting Rights Act because they were no longer necessary. They were from 40 years ago and they were not relevant to what was going on today in our country. We had apparently gotten past all of that, and they were striking down very strong aspects of the Voting Rights Act. That was going on. That hearing, that case was being heard in front of the Supreme Court the very same day that Congress was standing in Statuary Hall, patting themselves on the back for saying, look at how great of a nation we are, that we... Meanwhile, the Supreme Court is literally working to overturn the very things Rosa Parks was fighting for. Infuriating, right? This is what our nation does. And that I realized I was feeling so frustrated about this. And you've heard me talk about this in other cups of coffee, right? Where we love our white men love to point out how great they are, right? President Obama President Biden loves to talk about how he's the first president to have an African-American woman as a vice president, right? This is the first administration to do these things, the first administration to have a Native woman in the cabinet, the first, right? And all that. It's white men talking with pride that they're the first one to do these great things, instead of acknowledging how shameful it is, right? How shameful it is for our country that it is 2020, the 21st century, and we are barely now getting around to having our first Black woman as a vice president and our first Native woman sitting on the cabinet. That's not a source of pride. That's a shameful thing, that it's taken us, a nation that talks about equality and freedom and rights and all these things, it's taken us this long to get to this point. Other nations have reached this point long ago, and we're barely getting there, and we're patting ourselves on the back. Like, I've compared it in the past, like we're adults 25 years old who are proud because we finally learned how to wipe our own butts and our parents don't have to wipe our butts for us for the first time, right? This is like what it's like having the kind of pride we're having. And I realize that this is one of the things that infuriates about me is and I will be honest, I didn't know the full story of Rosa Parks before I began reading this book. I knew the token things that were promoted, that were taught in our history classes, that were celebrated in different parts throughout our calendar year in Black History Month. And I didn't know the depth of what Rosa Parks did throughout her entire life. And I'm ashamed of that. And so for me, it was hard to hear that, to read that in that first introduction. And then the second introduction, which was the second one printed, but it's the original introduction, the one when the book was first published back in the early 2000s. And that one begins by talking about, and it's titled National Honor Public Mythology, which is what I put on the splash screen behind me. Rosa Parks was honored nationally, but her life was made into a public mythology. And it talked about the day that Rosa Parks died and what happened and how her body was displayed in the Capitol Rotunda. She was again diminished into a quiet, humble, dignified, soft-spoken, never angry woman who did not raise her voice. She was framed as the mother of the movement. She was held up for her single solitary act. One of the quotes from the first introduction said, she was held up as a national heroine, but stripped of her lifelong history of activism and anger at American injustice. The Parks who emerged was a self-sacrificing mother figure for a nation who would use her death for a ritual of national redemption. And that made me angry. Because that's exactly what our nation does. That's exactly what we do, right? White supremacy, American exceptionalism, the myth of American exceptionalism, the why of white supremacy. What it does is it takes these incredibly articulate and hardworking people of color who have worked and struggled for so long against this nation so that we could have more equality and more freedom and more rights for everybody. And it reduces them, us, to a token. The Parks who emerged was a self-sacrificing mother figure for a nation who would use her death for a ritual of national redemption. That sentence is so true, it churns my stomach, because that's what our country does. The New York Times, in this first introduction, they said they labeled Rosa Parks the accidental matriarch of the civil rights movement. Someone who'd been working and training her entire life for that moment. And they called her the accidental matriarch of the civil rights movement. So yeah, these were the things, as I even just read through these first introductions, and it prepared me for what was going to be coming in the book. And I realized I was not going to be able to just kind of go through this book within a few days or even with a few weeks. I was going to have to listen to it, think about it, digest it, process it, lament it, and discuss it. I was not going to be able to get through this book very quickly. And so I've been taking my time. I'm literally on chapter 2 right now. Chapters 1 and 2 of the book talk about her life growing up. They talk about who she was as a child and the things that she learned and how her voice was being shaped and defined even as a young child. And that, again, comes with a whole nother level of infuriating stories. Because she grew up in the Jim Crow of the South, right? Where Black people and people of color were not considered human or equal. They were treated differently. Policing was absolutely there to oppress and marginalize and remove their civil rights. Everything that Abraham Lincoln envisioned when he put the clause in the 13th Amendment, right? The man who had no intention of making voters or jurors of Negroes or allowing them to hold office or to intermarry. That was what was happening in the 1940s and 50s when Rosa Parks was growing up and developing as a leader. She was living the horrors that Abraham Lincoln had envisioned for people of color to live in this country when he had no intention of ever seeing them as equal or allowing them to be full citizens of this nation. That was the world that she was living in. And it's infuriating to hear those stories. And so I have to read through them slowly. I have to process them. I have to think about them. Right? And then to see and to juxtapose that with these politicians who are literally patting themselves on the back for giving people like Rosa Parks a space in Statuary Hall. Look what an honor it is that we allowed this woman to be the first Black person to be in this hall. What a great thing that she gets to lie in proximity to other white men. Gosh. Right? This and then, right? Oh. Yeah. And this is what's hard. Someone asked me the other day when I was doing a Q&A for after a presentation when I spoke. And I had laid out all of my arguments about Lincoln. And someone asked me if they said, do you think, as horrible as Lincoln was, it would have been possible to get anyone in office at that time who was any better? In other words, is he the best we could have done? Yes, he was white supremacist. Yes, he was genocidal, but at least he ended slavery, right? And they asked the question, and I said a few things to them. I said, first of all, I don't want you to think about that question in any way of justifying Abraham Lincoln, right? No, the man was a blatant white supremacist and he was actively committing genocide. That cannot, should not, must not ever be justified. We can explain it, we can understand it, but we cannot justify it. And second, I said, look, today, right, we elected Donald Trump. I said, I ran as a person of color advocating, let's build a nation where we the people means all the people. Let's address the racism, the sexism, the white supremacy in our foundations. All of the other candidates completely ignored me. The press completely ignored me. I said, yeah, not only could we have not got someone elected back then in 1860, we can't even get someone elected in 2020 to address these things. So let's not pretend that we've gotten somehow better as a nation. We still can't get past this. So let's stop, please, patting ourselves on the back as a nation for how equal and free and fair we are as a nation, because we are not. We are barely now, the 21st century, putting our first people of color and women of color and marginalized people and LGBTQ into certain spaces where they have never been allowed before. And other nations have been doing this for decades, if not even longer than that. And we are thinking we're some great thing because we're doing this for the very first time in the 21st century. So this book just highlights how this nation is so right. The way they frame that original intro, national honor, public mythology. The way we create these myths about who we are and what we have or have not done. And then we live in those myths, and our nation fights, struggles to keep those myths intact. And yeah, I love this book. I really do like this book. I'm grateful for the work, the lifelong struggle of Rosa Parks. I'm grateful for Jeanne Theoharis for writing this book and bringing these things out. But they're difficult to read. Another thing that's difficult to read about this book is throughout her life, Rosa Parks called out not just white supremacy, not just white patriarchy, but even the way her community, marginalized people, people of color, and even other women refused to protest those things, refused to voice dissent, refused to make waves. And that's an uncomfortable part, right? Because she was literally saying, no, we have to put our foot down. We cannot give in to this. There's a story in one of the chapters, and it's about a time when Rosa was almost assaulted. And the person who was trying to assault her was led into the house by another black man. And she said to the person, she was talking with him the whole time, trying to humanize herself to him and point out the irony of his own actions and words. And she told him that she hated what he was doing and how he was acting towards her, and also hated what the black man had done and was acting towards her. And yeah, it's a challenging book. The book is very well titled, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, because I loved her voice. I love her voice. The more I learn about the way she thought, the way she saw herself, the way she spoke, the way she challenged everybody and everything is admirable. And it helps explain why she was tokenized the way she was, because she was a threat. She was a truthful, honest threat to the system of patriarchy and of white supremacy and of racism and sexism that existed within not only the white community, but even the way it was consented to and condoned within the black community. And so I'm going to continue reading this book. I invite you to join me. I'll let you know when I'm going to talk about a few more chapters. Again, I'm reading through it slowly because I'm processing this book as I go. I think I'm starting on chapter 3 or just about done with chapter 2 right now. And I'll continue to bring things up and to talk about them as I work through the book. I welcome you to join me. As I said, you can order the book anywhere you want to buy books. It's been a well-received book. There's even a video out there about this book, which I encourage you to watch. I'm going to watch it at the end after I'm done reading it because I don't want to watch it first. The book is always better than the video, so I'm gonna wait to watch the movie about it until I finish the book. You can get an audible version, audio version. You can get a Kindle version. You can get a paperback. You can get a hardcover copy of it. But I encourage you to get this book and to join me as I go through this discussion. And I welcome you to message me and give me some things that you're thinking about it, ideas that you have about it. I'd love to hear from people. I may even have some guests on me of people who are on with me sometimes who are reading the book as well, and we can have some discussion about it. But I want to have this being an ongoing conversation. So thank you all for joining me today. For those of you who are here frequently, I want to thank you for joining me on my second cup of coffee. Remember, I stream it live here on YouTube and Facebook. I try to do it every Tuesday and Thursday. I also post it on my podcast as a podcast, so you can download the audio version. We call that sometimes my second cup of coffee to go, and you can take the audio, download as a podcast and listen to it there. You can get that on all the major podcast sites. And if you like the work that I'm trying to do and you want to continue to support and encourage this work, I welcome you to subscribe to me on Patreon. It's a wonderful way. I work very hard not to monetize my social media. I know YouTube puts commercials on our ads into the videos that are up on my YouTube channel. I don't monetize those, so I don't get any money from them because I don't want advertisers to have any influence over what I do and do not say. And so, I work very hard to keep my voice as independent as possible. I do have my Patreon site as a way where people can subscribe to me. It takes the conversation even deeper. I actually post ad-free versions of the video and the audio on that site as well, so you can download those there. I have a monthly Q&A. I go into content about my new book, Decolonizing Faith. I give other presentations and other lectures on there, and it's a great place just to take the conversation deeper. So if you want to join me, you want to continue to support the work that I'm doing and help keep my voice independent, you can subscribe to my Patreon. Even if you just subscribe for 1 month, it's a great way just to kind of say thank you. You can subscribe to whatever tier you want. It describes what's on each of the tiers. And whatever tier you have, you not only get the content for that month, but you get 2.5 years of archived content of stuff I've been doing for the past 27, 28, 29 months. And so it's a great way to get a lot of stuff if you want to binge things quickly. But anyway, my relatives, thank you for joining me. I hope your cup of coffee is as good as mine is. Walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in this beauty together. Yá'át'ééh and Hakoneh.